Welcome everybody to the Neurodiversum podcast. Especially welcome Gaby. I really screwed up today because we already had started our conversation and I did not record it because I was feeling dumb today and I just forgot. So, but Gaby will start over with me. So we're starting fresh right now.
Yeah, no problem.
So.
No problem.
You start out in Peru, Gaby, with already working, you're already going to university, and then your nephews are born.
Yes, I went to university in
Mm-hmm.
Peru, and my nephew got a diagnosis, autism diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
That was about 17 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and I was at university. Even I studied something different, also something completely different because
What you
some people.
yeah?
Yes,
What
go
did you
ahead,
start
please.
with what studies?
Oh, I studied marketing and business and management.
Oh, okay, that is something completely different indeed.
Exactly, different from autism, and because some people who I knew in conferences and they think I am a pediatrician or I am a psychologist
Mm-hmm.
or a psychiatric things like I don't like they ask me and then when I tell them no I actually studied something and they are like shocked. They say, well, I didn't expect that because you are researching autism and doing this, so I thought it was related, or maybe education also. Some people tell me maybe you are from education. So but no, I didn't start. I studied something different. And actually I changed because of my nephews.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to learn more about autism to support them
Mm-hmm.
at the beginning, but then I realized there was a huge need in regards of autism support in my country. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why I wanted to learn more about that.
Okay, so what you need to know about Gabby is that she's kind of pioneering autism support in Peru. And before we started our conversation, we had a short talk about this. Like every country has its autism origin story, where at some point in the country's history, the country reaches a certain point of development, and it usually starts with a family. So in Germany, the first autism charity was founded by a group of mothers. And in Peru, it was started by you and your sister, as far as I understand, right?
Yes, I actually there were other people like there is, for example, someone who is a mother also, and
Mm-hmm.
she did a lot for the legislation because that was the first legislation we had for autism.
Mm-hmm.
And she also initiated an organization about increasing autism awareness in Peru.
Mm-hmm.
So she did it in the capital because that's where most things happen in Peru,
Mm-hmm.
in the capital in Lima. However, when I wanted to start with this initiative, I had some advice from friends, from colleagues also, because I studied marketing and business and management. So most of my friends they are marketers or they are administrators. So they advised me to, because I had this. I think that was helpful to start this organization, even though it's a non-profit. But when I studied marketing and business and management, I learned how to do a company, for example, how to start a
Mm-hmm.
company, registrations, and all of that. So that's from my background. However, my friends like advised me to start in Lima. They told me you can start here because you have contacts here and then everything is easier and you will get more support. But then I was thinking, so in Peru, in the countryside, even though in Lima there is some support, so in the countryside there is nothing. And I was thinking it's better for me to start in the countryside because that's where more families need support.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we decided to start with this in Cusco, actually, in the highlands of Peru,
Mm-hmm.
where I met families there and I saw that they had a like tremendous need about their support for the children. And I actually was like, then when I was thinking, like the decision I made to start there was a really good decision, because if I wouldn't be there, other people, it's really unusual that people start in places where there is no, because they don't have access to different services there. However, I was thinking more on the family's need more than the services, because I thought once I'm there, I can then ask for services and all of that. But if I don't go there, it's like so I would just be on the like on the comfort zone, maybe like Lima, for example. But then I wanted to go to a place where people really needed the support.
Okay. And so that's you and the organization that you're a part of in Peru. But then there's also your personal story. So your nephews are born. You decide to change the focus on your studies. And you look around, and the first sources you find is Argentina. Is that correct?
Yes, yes. Argentina was the only country that had more information, some research there. So that's because my sister also moved there for some time. And then my nephew got diagnosed actually in Argentina. And my other nephew was born in Argentina, so his diagnosis also is from Argentina. They didn't get the diagnosis in Peru, because by that time there was not really a few. We are talking about even in the world, there was really not much information as it is available now. But in Peru, we really no professionals got, because it was because like no universities had an autism modules or like a major. So professionals needed to go abroad, and it is difficult to when you don't have the funding, the right funding to go abroad to study.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about that. So when you're sitting in Peru and there's no university in Peru that offers the knowledge that you want more of, and you have to go abroad, like how do you do that?
For me, the process was actually I needed to start by studying English as because as a second language, because in Peru we speak Spanish as a main language. So I studied through a scholarship, and it was really a good course that the government actually had this scholarship. That was for 2 years, and everything was paid. So then after that, I got this opportunity to go to the U.S. through a fellowship, which is sponsored by the U.S. Department of State. So I went for 3 months to Washington, D.C., and then we were like each one had different host cities, and I was put in Little Rock, Arkansas. So I was there and I met with a host organization. I was Arkansas Autism Foundation. And that's where I learned more about autism, running an autism organization, nonprofit organization. And then after that, I went back to Peru and started with my organization, because when I went to the US, it was just a project idea that I had. But once I was in the US, I was exposed to several organizations and how to do the things. And I met with a really wonderful person. She was my host company, so she is now my mentor, and we met in 2017. So and she helped me a lot, because I even met people from also from the capital in Little Rock, and learned about policies also, and also legislation in Arkansas and in Little Rock. So and then when I was back in Peru, I started the organization with that knowledge, that experience. I realized that I needed more training, like more specifically to learn about autism, because as I mentioned, my undergrad is in business and marketing, business and management, which is something
Mm-hmm.
completely different. So I was looking for,
But it's probably a little bit helpful, huh?
yeah, yes,
For
yes. You're right, because they help to start a company. You need to know, for example, some things that I learned through my background, and then also to promote, because when you are a nonprofit, you also rely on other people's help, because you don't do activities to profit. So the income is really important for in this case, for this type of organization, because so you need to know, for example, learn about campaigns like crowdfunding campaigns, to raise funding and all of that. So that's what you learn
mm-hmm.
through business and management and marketing also, because this is a type of, yes, I think my background in marketing, business and management has been really helpful. Um, but I saw that in Peru, we didn't have any universities. I was looking, for example, the main universities, even in the capital in Lima, but they didn't have any course autism or module for autism. So I was looking abroad, and I saw that, for example, in Spain, they have a master's in autism, but in Spanish. Which is good. Well, I said it's good, but then because I had the English, so I said, well, maybe I can search for in other countries where that they are English speakers. So, but also the second problem is, once I got accepted to the program, was the funding. So I was looking for
Mm-hmm.
scholarships also, and I found out about this Chevening scholarship, which is UK government funded, and I applied for the scholarship. That was in 2018. So actually, I was back from the US, but I didn't have enough time for the application, so I applied really fast, and I didn't get it. But from like negative experiences, sometimes you get the positive is that you get experience, and the experience is positive because you can apply after that, and then you are going to do a better application, and that's what I did.
Yeah, mistakes are always a great opportunity for learning, aren't
Yes,
they?
yes, because if you don't make mistakes, how can you go like? Because sometimes it's like you are going like blinded because you don't know. But if you experience that, you know how is the path, so you know what things you need
Mm-hmm.
to improve and learn from your mistakes. So the next year in 2019, I applied to the same scholarship. So I got the scholarship, but the second time. So I put more effort on the application and did more my homework, did the research and all of that. And then I got a scholarship to study a master's in autism spectrum. That is in Queen's
Mm-hmm.
University Belfast in Northern Ireland. So I was for 1 year in Northern Ireland, in Belfast. And then I did a master's, and I was back in my country for a couple of years. And then I realized, like, that was during my master dissertation. I realized this gap about research for autistic adults. I found studies, for example, for autistic children and their families, but no study for autistic adults. And I wanted, like, got this, maybe I can do a PhD and focus on that, because I saw that this is an underserved population, and
Mm-hmm.
because autism is not until you are 18 years old. You live with autism basically your whole life. So after 18 years old, you continue having autism, but countries or so they don't have in place like other strategies or help for for autistic adults and their families. And then caregivers say that in their, for example, I was reading different literature and mentioned that. So that's why I decided to do. And then I applied to this GTA scheme for the UK.
Mm-hmm.
And I got it. I got this. So that was in 2022. I came back to
Mm-hmm.
the UK, and I'm here. I'm completing my PhD basically. I'm on my fourth year.
The Yeah, the thing that you mentioned just there, it's a thing that a pattern that goes through the whole history of autism. So in Germany, the same thing. When I was younger, there were some support services for children, but they all ended at the age of 18. No real services for adults. But also, like, I think we're just getting to a point where we understand autism as a thing that happens over the whole lifespan, because in my opinion, the older scientific models of autism, they often focus only on the childhood and have troubles, like they don't fit for an autistic person for their whole adult life. So for instance, you have some higher functioning autistic people, they will learn skills to mask, for instance, to not appear autistic in public, but it'll cost them a lot of energy. And so for that cohort of somewhat higher functioning autistic adults, the problem is they tend to have this loop of ending up in a burnout, because things like just going to a job, where we say about autistic people, when they go to a job, it's like they're doing two jobs, because they do the actual job and the whole social stuff is like a second job on top. And so burnout is a real problem for autistic adults, and all sorts of psychological things like oppressive compulsive disorder, depression, nervous tics, that sort of thing, like things that you will develop when you're in a constant state of being overwhelmed. So yeah, I think more focus on the adult life and autism models that work for the entire life, not just for children. I think that's really important. And so right now you're back in the UK and you're finishing your PhD. What is the focus of that PhD?
Yes, I'm finishing and completing my PhD. I'm on the fourth year. So the focus is on caregivers of autistic adults with high support needs and co-occurring also intellectual disabilities. In this case, so I work with like my PhD project encompasses three phases. The first phase is a systematic review with meta-analysis. So this is
Please say that again. The first phase is
systematic review with meta-analysis. Is
okay.
of interventions to support the well-being of caregivers of individuals with different neurodevelopmental conditions, including autism. And the phase two is an exploration of the needs of these caregivers, but in this case, because for the phase one, I was more wider because included caregivers of individuals with different neurodevelopmental conditions, also autism, right? And so I wanted to be wider because I found in the research, I found commonalities among the caregivers. So that's why I wanted to learn from other researchers who did interventions for example, caregivers of ADHD individuals and other also neurodevelopmental conditions, so that we can use this to support caregivers of autistic individuals with learning difficulties. That's actually the phase two. We wanted to learn more about some of the specific well-being needs of these caregivers, but the caregivers of autistic individuals with learning difficulties across different ages. So teenagers, children, teenagers, and adults, right? And then for the phase three, we wanted to be more narrowed and only focus on the gap that we identified, because each phase is interconnected. So each phase informs the following phase. Specifically, for example, with phase one, we wanted to see what is there. So what is out there, what interventions are there to support the well-being of these caregivers. And with phase two, we wanted to learn about the needs, and then also some facilitators and barriers to access well-being support. And then in phase 3, we did an intervention evaluation, and that was in Peru, and that was with caregivers of autistic adults with learning difficulties, right? So we saw, for example, in the phase 1, we found also that most studies were from Western countries, right? And we saw the gap that there was no study from Latin America nor from Peru, right? So that's a gap we found. So that's why we use that specific population for our phase 3. And also the intervention identified was acceptance and commitment therapy was one of the most used intervention for these caregivers in phase 1. And also some elements of peer support. So that's why we use those two interventions for the phase 3. Because the phase 3 is an intervention evaluation based on two approaches, acceptance and commitment therapy and peer support groups with caregivers of autistic adults with learning difficulties. And then based on, in this case, on phase 1, we identified those needs, and then based on that, we developed this intervention that we tested on this population. Yes, that's what we did through the PhD.
And so I would be interested during phase 2, when you concerned yourself with the needs of the caregivers, what kind of things would they say? What was important to them? What did they say they need?
Yes, in case of because this phase 2 was basically a qualitative-led study, qualitative-led with a mixed methods study, because basically we use an embedded questionnaire to learn about this the needs. So basically, the embedded questionnaire purpose was to support the things that we identified in the phase 2, right? So, and then we did semi-structured interviews also to learn about that. We divided in, basically we wanted to answer 2 research questions for that. So it is what are the some of the specific well-being needs, and the other research question basically was what are the facilitators and barriers to access well-being, so to access well-being support for these caregivers, right? So basically, so in case of the families, so they had, for example, healthcare needs. So about the, also mention about their children, that they wanted, for example, the children to be included in the interventions. For example, not only the intervention for the caregiver, but also for the children, right? And basically, it's like they needed additional support for them, because the support that they found was some support for the children, but not for their well-being, the caregivers' well-being. And that's what we saw, and then also the facilitators and barriers. In barriers, the lack of support from the government, because, for example, what we did is we did 17 interviews for the phase 2. 5 interviews came from the UK participants, and 12 we included from Peru, because we interviewed them for the phase 3, but the first part of the interview was about well-being. So when we were doing the analysis, the thematic analysis, so as I did it with a peer reviewer and with my supervisor, so they helped me to see that there were themes that were specifically for example, for well-being. So they told me that maybe I can use those themes for phase 2, because in phase 2 I wanted to learn specifically about those. And that's why I included those people also. And I have perspectives not only for people from Western countries, but also from people coming from Peru. And that's how we have this more, because it is actually, we had changes also in the design. I originally had a plan to do the intervention also in the UK, but I had problems with challenges with the recruitment, and we couldn't do it in the end. So the intervention was only in Peru, because we wanted to have a cross-cultural perspective, and that's something we thought we were missing for the project. But with this incorporating these interviews from phase 3 gave us this cross-cultural perspective, because we had opinions from Peru and also from the UK participants.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned about phase 3, you mentioned that most research on autism comes from Western countries. And what would you say is lacking? Like, I would assume that some of the research or some of the research output, some of the conclusions they came to, will probably be applicable to Peruvian people as well. But then there's probably other areas where it would be really important to have some Peruvian research as well. And I was wondering, like, what areas come to mind? Like, where do you think the lack is? Where's the gap most prominent?
You mentioned for autism research in Peru, other areas.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Yeah, what, like when you look at the research that was done in the West, like what areas are missing that you would need in Peru?
yes, for example, more research for the caregiver. So because what I saw is, and this systematic review is basically is about interventions to support the well-being of caregivers, right? So that's
Mm-hmm.
something that needs to be more developed in Peru. For example, in my case, I use acceptance and commitment therapy and peer support, but I identified other
Mm-hmm.
interventions that can be tested also in Peru with the caregivers. So as a
Mm-hmm.
feasibility study, and that's what I was talking about, for example, the budget, because sometimes you don't have the budget, but this intervention is not expensive, because I did it for my PhD and it was online, so I didn't have
Mm-hmm.
like many expenses about that. So you can, I think, you can implement this type of interventions for caregivers. For example, mindfulness. I found mindfulness also. I found dance movement psychotherapy. For example, my
Mm-hmm.
supervisor, April 2023, so she did a caregiver study, for example, based on dance movement psychotherapy for caregivers and their children. For example, in Peru, can use this type of intervention. Because I think the idea of doing the interventions and testing is not only to see, because what that's something I noticed also, and reminds me of finding that is important, is risk, in this case, publication bias. I found that, for example, in phase
Mm-hmm.
1, right? So that means most studies that are published are about positive results, so significant changes, but I didn't find a study that didn't work. And the idea of doing research is to see if things work, and what works and what doesn't work as well. Because what works, you can
Mm-hmm.
implement at a larger scale, right? But what doesn't work, you also see that you don't continue with that, right? But you
Mm-hmm.
need to know, because the idea is that like what is after the research, so the implication of the research is that it can benefit this population. So you will, for example, implement things that are more according to this population needs if you learn more about like these type of interventions to implement. First, I think it's important to do feasibility studies, because those are less expensive, and then to see if that works. And if that works, you can go to do a larger scale study. But it doesn't work. If it doesn't work, you don't do it anymore, because that's something that is not working. But that's the point.
Mm-hmm.
For example, publication bias, I found most studies that were published for example, acceptance and commitment therapy, mindfulness, psychoeducation, everything was positive, right? And things are not like that. So there are things that might work, and there are things that might not work. So what about the other studies? So that's a point also, for example. That is important because that can affect also the confidence that we have in the findings, right? To implement, because the idea is that we see something work and then we can implement on a larger scale study, if it's a feasibility study, for example. But if we don't see those examples, so from where we get, so if we think those findings are the only findings about that, because if you're testing that specific approach intervention, so you need to know what are the positive and then also some negative experiences. So that based on those lessons you learn, and then you develop something that is more suitable to that population. I think Peru needs more of that for caregivers, also for the autistic individuals, this type of interventions. I didn't find anything, neither in Peru nor in Latin America. I didn't find any other country, like, for example, Chile, Argentina. So most studies were in the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, and some, like one in Asia, one in Africa, Nigeria, for example, but not like most, I think, centralizing in basically Western countries.
Yeah, one of the things, or rather two things, come to mind. I've recently had a conversation with Fungai Mandonga, and he was also looking at cross-cultural differences, and that was focused on caregiving in the UK. And for instance, what he found out is that family structures play a huge role. So in the public discussion about migration, about representation that we have in Europe, there's always a lot like, you need people from your background in these services, that's better. Like, that's the talking point of pro-migration activists. But from what I learned from Fungai, it turns out that's not necessarily true. And one of the things is, when you have someone from the same cultural background as you, so you're an autistic person and you have an assistant who's from the same cultural background as you, that person might make assumptions about you that they might not be making if you were from a different cultural background, because they see, they're from the same cultural background, so they're probably kind of like me. And there's another aspect that also had to do with family structures. So both the autistic people involved in this relationship, they were kind of anxious if they had someone who was from their same cultural background, that they might talk with someone who knows them, so information might get out. But also we found that sometimes, that's how it was explained to me, sometimes the cultural background would work in a way where the caregiver would be approached in an inappropriate way by the autistic person's family. So for instance, there was a caregiver and she wasn't married yet, and the parents of the autistic person she was working with, they would always get into a business about why you're not married yet, because in the cultural background that they shared, marriage is super important. So that was interesting, I thought. And the other thing that Fungai hinted at is that he said that in Africa and in Europe, autism looks very differently. And the reason for that is that if you have someone who's averagely functioning or who's high functioning, and who might have support needs in particular areas but can kind of get through their day by themselves, then that is a person that would not show up for an autism diagnosis, and they would not necessarily show up in the support services, because that would be a person that would just be taken care of by the family, because that is how they understand family, which is different from how we do it in Europe a lot of the time, or in a lot of places. And I was wondering, I mean, you did focus on the caregivers in the families. Now, I was wondering, like, the average Peruvian family unit, like, can I imagine it kind of like the Spanish? So larger family units, cousins, nephews, uncles, aunts, the bond will be stronger or more frequent than in the postmodern European societies. Would
What is the structure? So in Peru, it depends because in the capital it might be different from the countryside.
Mm-hmm.
So what I noticed
Mm-hmm.
in the countryside, people are the bonds are stronger. That's what I saw in the family.
Mm-hmm.
So and then, but still for both for Peru is there is still stigma about autism also. Mostly
Mm-hmm.
in the countryside is because maybe the lack of information or combine many things, and then that's why people isolate. So I mean, caregivers isolate, and they don't have like these social spaces with other friends, or because they
Stigma in the sense that the family feels inclined to hide that someone is autistic in their family,
uh,
or how would that stigma
the
work?
stigma is because it's not because hiding, but it's because they don't want to answer questions. Maybe some people,
Mm-hmm.
why your child is like that, or things like that, or maybe whose fault is this, or about that,
Mm-hmm.
around that, and then maybe you are not.
Okay, so when you have a disease in Peru, is there part of the belief is that um, that it's that it's some sort of a punishment from God, that you kind of that you did something wrong to deserve this? Is there like a thought process like that?
For some people, still it is like that for some
Mm-hmm.
people, but nowadays not many people don't think like that. In the past, people used to think like that. So about
Mm-hmm.
demons, or about I don't know, things like related to other, like I don't know, to ghost, or to things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
now is people have more information, and they but still, the feeling that they have is like, they feel, because I was in the working with families, and also for the peer support groups. Uh, People talk about, not, for example, or friends, or even family members who are not really that close to them, like extended family, for example. So they try to avoid being in groups with them, because they feel that they don't want to be on their own with their family, with their I mean the
Mm-hmm.
close family, but they don't prefer to sharing with them, and it's
Mm-hmm.
because, so that's why these type of groups, peer support groups, they feel like, even though they are not their family members or friends, close friends, but they feel closer to other caregivers, because they feel that they understand them, because they are going through a similar situation, and then they
Mm-hmm.
they feel empathy towards them, and also
Mm-hmm.
that they feel that they feel understood by them. So that's more or less how they feel. That's why they said that they isolate themselves, because they prefer
Mm-hmm.
to be on their own, and not to, because other people might share. For example, my child is accomplishing this, and they are going to do this and that, but they feel that they don't have things to share about their own child because they are talking about things that they are not experiencing the same situation or the same achievements or maybe things that their children are doing. So that's why they prefer to isolate themselves because that's how they feel more comfortable.
From what I know about the situation of families, where here in Europe, Germany, for instance, when they find out that their child is autistic, then they tend to have questions. And what kind of resources are available in Peru? Let's say, and how does diagnosis work in Peru? Would you go to a large hospital? Would you go to a psychiatrist?
Yes, it's not really that clear because there is not a clear process. So, for example, for some people, they access to diagnosis through the pediatrician because they have a control, like a healthy child. That's the name. Because in Spanish it's something like I can translate in English, but I'm not sure if that same term is in English. I mean, this term is used in English, but the translation is healthy child control. That's the name. So you take your child every when the child is 1 month, and then 3 months, 6 months, and then
Yeah. We definitely have something like that in Germany. I don't know about the US, but
yeah. So it's like basically the pediatrician sees the milestones that the child is reaching, some things like that. So then when they see so because they go to take their child to this control healthy child, so they observe some autism risk, and they might for example have another appointment to see about that. But for some people don't know, for example, some families don't know about that, and they search for this, go to basically some organizations that are private, and they search for the diagnosis there. However, not everyone has the means to do that. Some families cannot afford that, and they just have the children at home, because even they don't take them to schools, because in schools they are not really like specialized in autistic children, working with them, and they don't know how to teach them, and what they have is just have.
oh yeah. The whole thing with schools who don't know how to deal with autistic people, I'm very familiar with that.
Yes, they don't know, and they just stay at home. And I saw many cases, like really sad cases that I saw when I was there doing some a project also in Peru. So in Cusco, but in a specific small town. And people came from for example, who just work in the field, like doing the crops and all of that. So they came with the children without shoes and different conditions, and these children had autism, but they didn't have a diagnosis, but you can see that their behavior and all of that, and they didn't have even the right type of also clothing and all of that. So
I know what you
then
mean.
after that they take for the pediatrician. There is only one person doing the diagnosis in Peru. There is not like a multidisciplinary team like I saw in the US. I don't know how it's in Germany, for example, but here in the UK it's also with a team who gives the diagnosis. Everyone needs to agree on a diagnosis according to their own, because the team encompasses different professionals. And then, but in Peru, it's just one person, is the pediatrician who gives the diagnosis. And then, based on the diagnosis, the parent goes, and then they don't have like further, after the diagnosis, there is no further support for them. So they get the diagnosis, and then it's just that they are on their own. They need to see getting therapies for the children if they can afford that. There is, I think, an organization, but it's also, again, in Lima, that they had some support for, I think they did an autism center, something like that. But still, to get the appointment for that is really difficult. And families also cannot get an appointment in 1 year or several months. So that's how they do the diagnosis. There is not like a clear procedure how to do it. It is just really, I think, eclectic way to diagnose in Peru currently.
Is there compulsory school attendance in Peru?
No, I think they have children have the like the type of national or public school for everyone, and they have inclusion now that they need to have like a certain number of autistic children and also children with disabilities. And there is a special education school also, and because they have more complex needs, children, and they
Yeah.
take their children to that place. But still, there are autistic children, children with Down syndrome, different conditions in the same room. And the way how, for example, as the experience I have, like autistic children, they need some type of individualized learning. So it's not like to be in one
Yeah.
group with everyone, because the way how they learn is it might be different. So you need, but they don't have this in place. So it's just everyone is there. And some, like, for example, if you don't have eye contact, so you don't, basically you are not going to do any to learn. And then there is only one person with, sometimes there is an assistant, but sometimes it's only one person with 20 children. And it can be really difficult for them for the person working with everyone at the same time without any sort of support. So yeah, that's,
I assisted a kid once. He did go to a special ed school, and it was a small class, like I think 6 or 7 children, so that part was good. But one of the kids in the classroom was a kid with Down syndrome who had a tic. And every 2 to 5 minutes, he would make a loud sound. Like you couldn't set the clock after it, but it would happen at least every 5 minutes. And every time that kid made his loud noise, my kid, like, his energy bar was going down, down, down. So he was at a special ed school, but he was definitely not in the kind of class that was helping him. So I can relate to that. In Germany, we have compulsory school attendance. So if you, as parents, if you don't send your children to school, if you don't make sure they go to school, you can actually get punished.
oh, okay.
But we have situations where you have the family of an autistic child, and they send their child to school. There's problems in school, and the school says, oh, we can no longer accommodate your child, or we cannot accommodate your child unless they are unless they get an assistant sent along with them. But then there is no available assistant in the region, and then despite the fact that the parents have to send their children to school, they can't, because the school says we can't have your child the way it is. There's no assistance that can help. And then you have the odd situation where the parents would have to send their kid to school, but they can't. And then you have kids that just stay home and don't get any schooling, which I think is an enormous problem. Because, yeah, everyone should have access to education. And so, is Peru, so that this might be a stupid question, but I just don't know a lot about South America. Is Peru part of the United Nations?
Yes, yes.
And so you are implementing the UN Charter.
Yes, I think, yes.
because there's part of that that relates to disability and education. And that's how inclusion came to Germany, because we signed that particular treaty on disability and education, and now we have an obligation to include children in schools. Is that the same thing that's happening in Peru? Is that where the inclusion came from?
Yeah, I'm not really that sure about this that specific point, but I remember that about uh, disability. So having children with disabilities in schools was some years ago was implemented, and they
Mm-hmm.
even they needed a specific quantity of people because they like education ministry that so they found out that many schools didn't accept like children with disabilities, and they families
Mm-hmm.
couldn't register the children at school. They said that education is a right also in Peru for children, so they
Mm-hmm.
deserve to go
Yeah.
to. They have the right to take the children to school, and that's how they implemented this. But Peru is part of the United Nations also. However, there are
Mm-hmm.
things that they don't have in place still about disabilities, even though this is like they need to have the register the children. I mean, they need to have at least like a percentage of children with disabilities in schools, but some schools don't have that. And
Mm-hmm.
there is not like a clear so regulation about who is doing or who is not doing or including. So most like families or the civil society needs to do like for example, oh this I tried to register my child and he was not accepted. So after that they do things, but they don't have something in place like a fine or something for a school, because most private schools, like I saw, for example, some news about private schools also not accepting autistic children, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, but there is not a fine in place so that this that prevent this organization or these schools to do from doing that, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
so they don't do it and just they receive just I don't know, something, a document or something, but they don't receive like a fine so that they don't do, so that they can accept the autistic children or children with disabilities in their schools.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we haven't figured it out in Germany at all either. So we started implementing inclusion in 2009, and it's basically been, so we have inclusion now. So all the disabled kids are going to go to the normal school now. And that's that. That's what the politicians said. And then there were no funds for the schools. There were no programs for the schools, no like concepts on how to do it. So each school was on their own, and it led to very mixed results. So they would send all sorts of children to regular schools, like pretty much all of the kids that you can send to regular schools. I mean, there's just certain disabilities where the person is impaired in a way that regular education just doesn't make sense. Um, but they try to pretty much send everybody else to the regular schools. Then it turns out that doesn't work because you have certain disabilities. They come with needs. If you just send this kid to school by themselves, it doesn't work. And then they came up with the assistance system. So a lot of autistic children, for a lot of autistic children, this applies. They will have an assistant who accompanies them into school. And for instance, when the kid has a meltdown, the assistant will take them outside or whatever, like try to bridge the gaps that are between the needs of the kid and what the school has to offer. but we're far from having a consistent system. So we have 16 different states that make up the country, and the education system is a little bit different in each of the states, and so there's still a lot going on. We also don't, like, parents don't, they cannot sue for their kid being schooled. So just like in Peru, the families can fall through the gaps and they can end up in a situation where the child is not being educated. That's a very, very unfortunate situation. And yeah, that I really hope that we get that figured out, because I think that a society really loses out when they are not capable of educating their autistic population. Because, I mean, not all autistic people, but some autistic people are overachievers in intellectual endeavors, and they can really be a benefit for the whole country, I think. And so I think we can't really afford to leave them behind. And I was wondering, I mean, one part or one thing that all families with autistic children have, one need they all have in common, they need information about autism, and they need to understand what autism is. And I was wondering, how well is Peru connected to the internet, especially in the rural areas? Is it, for instance, possible to educate families in rural areas, like in the way that we are doing right now? Would you be able to have a Zoom session with them? Is their internet connection good enough to reach them that way?
I think in some areas it's possible now improved because there are different companies doing that, that they can
Mm-hmm.
reach really far areas of Peru currently. For example, for the intervention I did for the PhD, my PhD, the phase three of my PhD, I had participants from the countryside also of Peru. I had participants from the capital, but also from the countryside.
Mm-hmm.
And so they had some problems, like so I mean they could connect, but they had some problems of mostly unstable internet connection, right?
Mm-hmm.
But most of the sessions, they were really, their internet was okay, working well.
Mm-hmm.
However, there are still some areas that might be difficult. And when, for example, there is support, and what families do is, because they live in the really high parts of the highlands, so to
Mm-hmm.
that point they don't have connection. So what they do is they come to the city, to the town, and in order to look for the support, because
Mm-hmm.
otherwise they will not be able to connect. Like those families, for example, I that was in 2018, project I did with the U.S. Embassy in Peru. We did like workshops, and we did in Urubamba, which is a town in Cusco. It's a part of like it's 2 hours far from Cusco City. So we went there. I brought actually a couple of authors from the US, and they did a workshop for the families, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
had many families coming from the highlands, really high parts, to get these, for example, these sessions, because for them would be really difficult to get online because they don't that they really be live in rural areas, and it's
Mm-hmm.
difficult to get the internet. They don't have it, so we did the sessions in person, right? But we were
Mm-hmm.
exploring to do the sessions maybe online, but it would be really difficult to do it because, for example, those families wouldn't be able to connect because they don't have the connection. So what we did
Mm-hmm.
is I had a contacts, for example, for the this is an organization for the Sacred Valley people with disabilities. So they have like a communal center or communal area. So they might provide some devices or internet for family, but families need to reach that point. And that sometimes means 4 hour walking, something like that, to get to that part. And they
Mm-hmm.
even come with their children also to receive that. So also what I realize is also that childcare is also important to have in place while parents are receiving the intervention or the session, because they bring their children, and sometimes the children they don't like being seated in one place, so they need to do play or do things. It's normal for children, they want to do
Mm-hmm.
things. So you need to have childcare in place so that they can play and do things while their parents are attending
Mm-hmm.
the sessions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, yeah, okay. So, having heard all of this, I think I understand now why your intervention is focused on the caregivers. Um, Tell me again, what is the name of your organization that you founded in
Oh
Peru?
yes, it's Ser Azul es Emprender. That's the name. Is a name in Spanish. So it's
Mm-hmm.
actually an initiative that grew out of all of my experience, and it focuses on autistic people and their families as agents of change, not just as recipients of services. So the idea of, for
Mm-hmm.
example, emprender, which is brother, like the meaning in English is like undertake or start something. It's broader than
Mm-hmm.
starting a business. It's about starting projects, for example, building skills and creating community spaces that are neurodiversity affirming and respectful of the realities of Peruvian families. So through this
Mm-hmm.
organization, Ser Azules Emprender, I try to connect three words: rigorous scientific research, the lived experience of caregivers and autistic people, and advocacy work with associations and policymakers. So, for example, this has included giving talks to caregiver groups like AUNAP and Adapta Autismo, where I share the latest
Mm-hmm.
autism research in simple, empowering Spanish and listen carefully to their priorities and concerns. So,
Mm-hmm.
as a long-term vision is to keep building collaboration and small feasible projects that bring science closer to families and also help shape, in this case, more just and inclusive policies in Peru and beyond. So this is
Mm-hmm.
also something interesting. For example, like this talk I had that was last weekend, and that was about the conferences I recently participated as the
Oh, you were in Switzerland last weekend?
I was in actually in Australia, Perth.
Oh wait, oh wait. Okay, I misunderstood. I thought you said Davos. What was the name of the city you were at?
Perth.
Oh, Perth. Okay, yes, yes. I think I read about it on LinkedIn that you were going there.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've been to APAC 2025 and presented also my research there.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually explained because during like I presented and there were other speakers and also really researchers. For example, like Francesca Happ, she works for King's College and she's doing a lot of research, autism research for more than 30 years. And
Mm-hmm.
also Professor Dr. David Amaral, also from the US, and Matthew Seigel, also doing profoundly autistic individuals research. And I share with AUNAPE, this organization that encompasses like about 18 organizations supporting autistic individuals across Peru. So share with them about what I learned through these conferences, through the keynote speakers, and in really lay language, because the point is that these families, they are also interested about learning, but they have many disadvantages. The main one is the language barrier, because most of these conferences is in the main language is English. They might be able to go, for example, if they get funding, but the problem is that if they go, they wouldn't understand because it's in English. And another
Mm-hmm.
point is that also the language that is used is scientific, so it might be complex also to understand. And then if there is, for
Mm-hmm.
example, the main one is the funding. So, for example, to go to Perth, Australia is really far, and you need a really
Mm-hmm.
like the funding is really you need a lot of money to go. For them, it's difficult, and so the idea of going to these conferences to present and also to learn, for me, is that this type of knowledge, I believe that it should be for sharing with others, and in this case for with the caregivers because that's the population and the group of people I'm working with, and I'm happy that they ask questions and they learn from this. So because and that's the way how we do to basically put like this like research is for the also for the families because that's the idea why we do research, uh, so that they can improve the lives of the autistic individuals and their families. So yes,
Mm-hmm.
we had a 1 hour discussion where I shared some things I learned from the conferences, and I had many questions from caregivers. I had about 20 caregivers connected, and it was a Zoom event because basically I'm in the UK and they were in Peru.
Mm-hmm. And with you being all busy on your quest for more knowledge to bring home, when was the last time you saw your nephews?
Oh, that's basically because one of them we went to Turkey in September,
Mm-hmm.
and we met with them because
Mm.
my sister came with my brother-in-law and brought one of my nephews, the oldest. So
Mm-hmm.
he was very excited
Mm-hmm.
because he is also learning English, and he is really I like the way because even for me sometimes I even though I've been speaking English like as a second language for maybe about 8 years, right? Because I studied at university, but I think that where I really learned English was when I had this scholarship. But for
Yeah, your English is really good.
Oh, thank you so much. Sometimes I feel like I don't know, like embarrassed or some things to say, to pronounce, or. But my point is that my nephew.
Well, you have a thick accent, but your English is still very good.
Oh yes, yes, yes. I know. But the point is that my nephew, for him, is really like he's been uh he learned English like maybe in one or a couple of years, but he's really enthusiastic,
Mm-hmm.
and he's not really he doesn't feel embarrassed or to talk. And I really like how he's so to use English and then to ask for something that he likes or he wants. So I because he's now an adult and I always like see as a child. So when he was younger, of course, but now it's like he because when he was younger, so I used to like helping him and supporting him. But now he's supporting me, so this is something really nice that we actually spend some days together in Turkey.
That sounds cool. Okay, then I have this one question that I ask pretty much all of my guests. In your own words, what is autism to you?
So, in my own words, autism, I think it's a lifestyle, a way of living. So, being yourself. So that's from my experience I have because I'm not autistic, but I can see from my nephews, for example, experience. Also, some at the beginning and maybe relying on your caregivers or you're relying on your relatives, but then so having no I think no paradigms or to do things without like for example having like I will do this wrong or not. So just doing without thinking about that, and then also inspiring other people through what you do. That's what I believe autism is.
Thank you for your answer, Gaby. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for doing the pioneer work in Peru. And I hope you will go far with it. I will feature you as good as I can with the limited reach that I have.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Fabian, and thank you for what you're doing. Yes, I accepted your invitation because since you interviewed me when we met at the conference, so and then I saw the video and all of that. So you are really professional on what you do, and really
thank you.
clear the message because I felt that I explained because sometimes when you listen to a new topic for the first time, it can be, oh, there are many things, but you really put clear what I'm doing in really like a small presentation about like a very succinct. And also I like the professional because you put like the video and the title, all of that. So there was obviously a lot of work and effort there, and it was really good to see that. And thank you for doing this also because it's important that what you're doing with other researchers also. And wish you a lot of luck in other like endeavors with other interviewees, and in your also future projects.
Thank you for the feedback.
Thank you.